Hi, I'm Prarthna Kedia, and I have with me Evgenia Sorokina. We're attorneys at Cogent Law Group, and we're going to be speaking to you about the EB5 investor visa under the United States Nationality and Immigration Act. What are the US visa options for investors and entrepreneurs? What is EB5 in a nutshell?
EB5 is an immigrant visa which leads to a green card, a status of lawful permanent resident.
Right.
For the investor and his or her immediate family members,
Right.
spouse and children younger than 21 years old and unmarried.
Right.
The investor has to come to the United States with the purpose of engaging in a new commercial enterprise. Investor must invest $1 million in such new commercial enterprise, or if the enterprise is operating in a targeted employment area, the
Right.
amount of investment is less. It's $500,000. By the end of investor's conditional residence, which is 2 years, the investor has to create 10 full-time jobs by his or her investment.
Right. Evgenia, as I understand, a lot of other countries have similar programs. Why would a foreign national or an Indian investor want to choose US over these other countries?
Well, immigration is a life decision.
Right.
Usually people consider different factors taking this important decision in their lives, such as language commonality, presence of friends or family members in the new country, culture, environment, climate. Those Indian nationals who are considering to immigrate into the United States, they may be thinking about other countries. They need to realize that the EB5 program is still more favorable compared to similar programs of other countries. For example, Singapore requires $2.5 million as a minimum investment.
Right.
Germany requires 1 million euros,
Right.
which is still more than $1 million or 500,000. Then Switzerland requires $10 million.
Right.
And the process of obtaining a residence in Switzerland can take up to 12 years.
Right. Evgenia, which brings me to the question, why would an Indian investor want to invest in EB5 at all? What are the benefits of investing in an EB5 investor visa program?
Once the investor made a decision to immigrate into the United States, an
Right.
Indian investor in particular, there are other avenues to do that. Typically, it's through the employment, because India produces and keeps producing a big number of fine professionals who compete for the jobs with the US companies. The US companies hire them, they like them, they promote them, they want to keep them.
Right.
Then the companies would want to sponsor them for a green card, for residence.
Right.
Due to the limit of number of employment-based immigrant visas and the further apportionment of that number to various countries, India is suffering from a very, very big backlog of immigrant visas based on employment.
Right.
For example, the holders of bachelor's degrees
Right.
working for US companies who are sponsored by the US companies, they have to wait 10 years and 1 month before an immigrant visa can become available to them. Holders of master's degrees have a waiting period of 9 years.
Wow.
The EB5 program, obtaining a green card through an EB5 program is much faster
Right.
than any of these avenues.
Right.
It is especially important for the children of the families of the immigrants, because a child has to be under 21 years old and unmarried
Right.
when the immigrant visa becomes available, to be able to benefit from the relationship as a derivative to the parents.
Right. So, going back to the question of investment of funds, you mentioned these funds have to be invested in a new commercial enterprise. What is a new commercial enterprise?
A new commercial enterprise is any entity, for-profit entity, which is engaged in the conduct of lawful business.
Right.
It can be a corporation, it can be a limited liability company, it can be a limited partnership. Such entity has to be set up after November 20, 1990, which means that an investor can invest into an existing business.
Right.
The requirement of the Immigration and Nationality Act for such investor would be that the investment has to increase the net worth of the existing business 40%, or increase the number of employees of such business 40%.
Right.
Investor can also invest in a troubled business.
Right.
The requirement of the INA for such investment would be to preserve the number of jobs existing at the moment of investment.
Right.
And such number of jobs has to be more than 10 or more. What is a troubled business? Troubled business is any business that suffered losses of net worth of at least 20% during the period of time of 12 to 24 months prior to the investment.
Right. So, Evgenia, you mentioned that if an investor were to invest $500,000, that investment would have to be in a targeted employment area. What is a targeted employment area?
The reduced minimum requirement of investment into a targeted employment area, it's 500,000, and the targeted employment area is either a rural area or an area where the population has an unemployment rate of 150% of the national average rate.
Okay. And are there any specific requirements for the origin of these investment funds?
Absolutely. The investment funds have to come from lawful sources,
Right.
and they have to be traced to the investor.
Okay. So, what would be the ideal documents required for tracing the source of funds?
This would depend where the money is coming from.
Right.
And naturally, there are only few categories of lawful source of funds,
Right.
where the money can come lawfully
Right.
from. They are income from an existing business of the investor,
Right.
or a gift or an inheritance from a family member,
Right.
or a proceeds from sale of available property, for example, real estate.
Right.
Or it could be a loan, but such loan must be secured by the investor's personal assets.
Okay.
For example, speaking about the income from the existing business,
Right.
investor will need to provide tax returns of the business and his personal tax returns for at least 5 years.
Right.
And such tax returns must show that the business made profit, that
Right.
profit was distributed to the investor as dividends,
Right.
and the taxes were paid by the company and by the investor.
Right.
Also, investor will need to demonstrate that the investor actually owns the business or
Right.
owns shares in this business.
Right.
A share register will be presented for that purpose, or an extract from the registry of companies.
Right. So, Evgenia, what about tracing of funds? As I understand, the investor has to trace his funds to himself. How can an investor prove that the invested funds are owned by him?
That's right. The investor has to prove the ownership of the investment funds. The money has to start its journey at the investor's bank account
Right.
and finish at the bank account of the new commercial enterprise.
Right.
Or at an escrow account,
Right.
where the money will be kept until the condition of release is satisfied. Normally, it's an approval of the investor's application for the investment visa. So every third account that the money goes through in this journey has to be disclosed and accounted for.
Right.
Bank statements of all the accounts involved will be produced, and the wire instructions from one account to another, from second account to the third account, from third account to the final destination account.
Right.
That's how it works.
Okay. So, considering all these documents that have to be submitted, the funds have to be traced, how long does the initial EB-5 process take?
The adjudication of the applications takes 15 or 16 months right now. And obviously, there will be time when investor will be gathering all these documents related to the new commercial enterprise, business plan, corporate documents of the new commercial enterprise, source of funds documents, tracing of funds documents. It will depend how quickly the investor can gather all these necessary documents. That will be an additional time to the adjudication time.
Right. So, how does one invest these funds? For example, an Indian family that has the requisite amount of money but very little knowledge of the US market. Can anyone come to the US, invest in a business, create 10 jobs, and get a green card?
Obviously, for somebody who resides outside of the United States, who doesn't know the market, who doesn't know the business environment, regulatory framework, it will be very difficult, if possible at all, to create and sustain a successful business for at least 2 years and create 10 objective jobs at such a business. However, there are specific investment funds in the United States called regional centers,
Right.
who serve this type of investors and help them to make an investment and obtain a green card based on such investment.
Right.
The projects, the business projects of the regional centers, sponsored by the regional centers, have been already pre-approved by the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS. In practice, that means that the investor will not need to care about writing a business plan, setting up a company, drafting all the corporate documents for the company. The investor will have only to produce the source of funds documents and
Right.
the tracing of funds documents.
Right. Ardia, how do these regional centers operate?
The regional centers are usually involved in large projects, multi-million-dollar projects. Very typical, they engage in real estate development. So they design the project, they draft a business plan, they commission an economic impact analysis study, set up an entity or a number of entities, draft all the corporate documents, have them pre-approved by the USCIS. Then they solicit foreign investors. Usually there will be several EB5 investors in one such project. For each of them, they will need to create 10 jobs by the end of 2 years after the approval of their applications. Usually, regional centers would raise additional financing from other sources, such as commercial banks, investment banks, equity investment from US citizens or companies. They would assign some roles to the EB5 investors because that's a requirement of the INA. An EB5 investor can be just a passive investor. Usually it's formulation of the company policy,
Right.
which would require the EB5 investors to vote on general matters of the company policy.
Right.
In reality, the investor would have no control over how the project is developed.
Right. So, Evgenia, can a regional center guarantee a return on the investor's investment or a return of the investment money if the project is not successful?
No. By law, nobody can do that. The return on the investment or the repayment of the investment cannot be guaranteed under the INA. The investment money has to be a total risk of loss during the investment. However, successful regional centers repay the invested money to the investors.
Right.
Usually it happens after 5 years.
Okay.
And also they typically pay a small return on the investment annually, something about 1%.
Right. So, Evgenia, that brings me to the question that the Reserve Bank of India, the Central Bank of India, has a cash outflow limit, which may limit the amount of money that can leave the country. Would you be able to elaborate on that a little?
Absolutely. Currently, the Reserve Bank of India limits the amount of money that can be exported by an Indian national for immigration purposes to $250,000.
Right.
For a family of two adults, that means 500,000,
Right.
which is a minimum investment into a targeted employment area.
Right.
However, most probably the investor will need to cover some expenses which are associated with this investment. They will be the administrative fee of the regional center, they will be legal fees, they may be due diligence fees to pay.
Right.
An additional amount can be taken out of the country through the bank account of a trusted friend or relative.
Right.
That's the current practice.
Right. So, Evgenia, what would you say are the key challenges of the EP5 process?
The challenges of investing through a regional center stem from the fact that the investor has no control of how the project is being implemented.
Right.
The challenge of investing into a business owned by the investor,
Right.
direct investment, is that the investor has to be responsible for the operation of this business and make it sustainable, sustain the investment into this business at least for 2 years for the period of the conditional residence, and create 10 jobs, 10 objective needed jobs
Right.
for this business.
Right.
It's not an easy task.
Right. So, what would you suggest as mitigations for the risks that we just spoke about?
For investment into a regional center, the investor needs to choose a regional center really carefully.
Right.
Past performance of the regional center needs to be closely analyzed. The solidity of the current project where the investor may want to invest has to be evaluated.
Right.
For that, we have proven and good professionals in the United States who help the investor to perform the due diligence of the regional centers.
Right.
Some information can be available for free, and a deeper investigation, a deeper evaluation would require a fee to be paid.
Right.
Then the mitigation of risks of a direct investment. The investor will need support on the ground in
Right.
the United States. He or she will need professionals and managers who can help him or her to manage the business, to make it sustainable.
Right.
It would be nice if they come from family members or from good friends, so the investor will trust them more than an outsider, but this support is absolutely necessary.
Right.
And under any scenario, the investor will need an experienced immigration attorney and an experienced Indian finance attorney who would help the investor to compile a good approvable application for an immigrant visa. And we are here to help.
Right.
We are Prarthna, Kedia, and Evgenia Sorokina in Washington, D.C. We have our Indian partners, experienced finance attorney who are also happy to help, and we will be happy to hear from you if you have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much.